All right, let's pull back the curtain on the global economy for a minute. We're going to look at the one resource that, when you really get down to it, dictates the entire balance of power. I mean, this is a force that literally builds nations and can bring them to their knees.
So just think about it for a second. What if all those headlines you see about stock markets, about currencies, what if they're just a symptom of a much, much deeper game being played? A game that's all centered on energy. I mean, it's the lifeblood of our modern world, right? It heats our homes, it powers our industries, and it moves pretty much everything we buy. Which means the ability to control it. Well, that's arguably the single most powerful geopolitical tool there is. Okay, let's really dive into how this all works. So to really get this, we've got to look at the system itself, this kind of invisible architecture that holds up all of global power. And right at the heart of it all is something called the energy supply chain. Now, don't just picture pipes and big tankers. It's so much more than that. It's this massive, incredibly complex web that connects the people who produce energy to all of us who use it, stretching across thousands of miles. You can almost think of it as the circulatory system for the entire global economy.
And this whole system, it really rests on three main pillars. You've got crude oil, which is the fuel for, all our transportation and industry. Then there's natural gas, which is absolutely critical for heating and generating electricity. And finally, electricity itself, the thing that powers our day-to-day lives. Make no mistake, these are the real commodities of power.
This system, right off the bat, creates this huge global divide. It basically splits the world in two. On one side, you've got the energy-rich exporters. These are the countries sitting on tons of resources. And on the other side, you have the energy-dependent importers, nations that have to bring in energy just to keep the lights on and their economies moving. And that imbalance? That's exactly where all the power dynamics really start.
And look, the scale of this dependence is absolutely staggering. When you look at the numbers, oil and natural gas make up a massive chunk of the world's energy mix, almost 60%. That isn't just a random statistic. It's the whole reason why control over these specific resources is so fiercely contested.
Okay, so this is where things go beyond just simple economics. Because when a resource is this vital, its supply chain stops being just a logistical network. It turns into a strategic weapon.
So how exactly is this weapon used? Well, there's a pretty clear playbook, really. Step 1, dominate the production of a key resource, like oil or gas. Step 2, control the routes it travels on. We're talking pipelines, shipping lanes, the whole 9 yards. And finally, step 3, you use that control to dictate the terms. You get to influence the politics and the economies of any nation that depends on you.
And this brings us to a really critical idea: strategic choke points. Think of these as narrow hallways where a huge amount of the world's energy has to squeeze through, places like the Strait of Hormuz or the Suez Canal. Controlling one of these choke points is literally like having your hand on the world's main energy valve.
Which leads us to what you could call the leverage equation. And it's actually pretty simple. The more control an exporter has over the supply, and the more dependent an importer is on that supply, well, the more geopolitical leverage the exporter gets. It's a straight-up transfer of power from the one who needs it to the one who has it.
So here's the main takeaway from all this. The next time you see a news report about giant tankers crossing the ocean or a new pipeline getting built, remember, you're not just watching commerce, you're literally watching power in motion.
But what happens when that flow of power gets disrupted? Because this isn't some abstract geopolitical game played by people in suits. The consequences create real, tangible shockwaves that, trust me, are felt by every single one of us. It usually starts with what's called a supply shock. Maybe there's a conflict near one of those choke points, or a country decides to cut production for political reasons. All of a sudden, prices can just skyrocket. I mean, we've seen cases where prices jump 45% in a super short time, just because the market is reacting to the risk.
And that price spike doesn't just stay at the gas pump. Oh no, it sends ripples through the entire economy. A sharp rise in energy prices is a huge driver of inflation. Think about it, since energy is needed to make and transport basically everything, when energy costs more, everything costs more. It's a huge reason why we can see inflation jump.
So let's break down this cascade effect. First, global markets get super volatile because of all the uncertainty. Then, economic growth can slow down or even tip over into a full-blown recession because businesses and people like you and me start cutting back on spending. And of course, the most direct hit, we all feel it in our wallets. Higher prices for gas, for groceries, for everything. That's why this matters. It hits all of us. Okay, so we've seen how the system works, how it can be used as a weapon, and how it directly impacts all of our lives. This brings us to the final and most important question.
If there's one thing you take away from this, let it be this. Energy doesn't just power our economies, it defines who controls them. The control of energy is, in many ways, the control of destiny. It decides who our allies are, it fuels conflicts, and it charts the course for the entire global economy.
And here's the thing. As we all start to transition towards new forms of energy, renewables, new technologies, this entire power map is being redrawn right before our eyes. This shift is going to create new energy exporters and importers, brand new choke points, and totally new kinds of dependencies. So the real question for our future is, who's going to control those flows, and who will be the next to hold the power?